The stars had always called to humanity, and in the year 2147, they finally answered back, but not in the way anyone had hoped or dreamed. Captain Marcus Chen sat in the command chair of the research vessel Horizon as the ship completed its first faster-than-light jump. And for a brief moment, the entire crew celebrated with tears and laughter and embraces that spoke of decades of human ambition finally realized. "We did it," whispered Dr. Sarah Kim, the chief scientist, her voice trembling with emotion as she stared at the unfamiliar stars outside the viewport. "We actually did it!" But their celebration lasted only minutes before the sensors began screaming warnings that no one could understand at first. 3,000 ships materialized around Earth in the span of a single heartbeat, and each vessel was larger than anything humanity had ever constructed. Their hulls gleaming with metals that human science could not identify and weapons that pointed at the blue planet like accusing fingers. The message came simultaneously to every screen, every phone, every device capable of receiving a signal, and the face that appeared was not human at all. High Arbiter Velkos of the Thesari stood 12 feet tall, his body covered in chitinous plates that shifted between purple and black, and his four eyes regarded humanity with the cold patience of a being who had delivered this same message to countless worlds before. Species designation: human, Velkos announced. His voice translated into every language on Earth through technology that seemed like magic. "You have triggered the detection beacons placed throughout this galaxy by the Galactic Council, and your unauthorized development of faster-than-light travel has brought you to our attention across the world." Billions of people stopped whatever they were doing and watched in terror as the alien continued speaking. "The Galactic Council has maintained peace and order for 100,000 years. And we represent 12 elder species who have guided the development of this galaxy since before your ancestors climbed down from trees," Velkos said. And something that might have been a smile crossed his alien features. "You are young, and the young are dangerous. And the young are unpredictable, and therefore the young must be controlled." In Geneva, Secretary General Amara Okonkwo watched the broadcast from her office, her hands gripping the edge of her desk so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "Earth will surrender unconditionally," Velkos continued. "You will dismantle your military forces within 30 solar rotations, and you will accept protective integration as a client species of the Council. And your technology will be regulated, and your expansion will be limited. And your future will be determined by those wiser than yourselves. And if we refuse," someone shouted from a crowd in New York, and somehow, impossibly, Velkos seemed to hear the question. "Every young species is given this choice," the High Arbiter replied. And his four eyes seemed to look directly at every human simultaneously. "Those who accept live in peace under our guidance, and those who refuse are pacified. And pacification is not pleasant, and pacification is not merciful, and pacification leaves no survivors." The transmission showed images, then worlds reduced to ash. Cities melted into glass, entire species erased from existence. Because they had dared to say no, panic erupted across Earth as people screamed and cried and ran to places that could not possibly protect them from the fleet overhead military. Analysts worked frantically through the night, running simulation after simulation, and every single result told the same story. Humanity would lost approximately 6 hours against the Council Armada, and that was the optimistic estimate in Beijing. General Jiang Wei stared at the numbers and felt a cold emptiness in his chest that he had never experienced in 40 years of military service. "We have no chance," he said quietly to his staff. "None at all." But in Geneva, Secretary General Okonkwo was making a call to a facility that officially did not exist, to a project that had been classified beyond top secret for over 50 years. "It's time," she said into the phone. And the voice on the other end simply replied, "We're ready." The next morning, Okonkwo requested a communication channel with the Council fleet, and when Velkos appeared on screen, she bowed her head respectfully in a gesture that seemed to please the alien High Arbiter. She said, her voice calm and measured despite the fear that churned in her stomach. "Humanity requests 24 hours to prepare our response to your generous offer." Velkos made a sound that might have been laughter, and several other alien figures, visible behind him, exchanged glances that clearly communicated their amusement. "You wish to delay your surrender so that your people may come to terms with their new reality," Velkos said, nodding his massive head. "This is acceptable and even wise, and we have found that species who accept their fate gradually cause fewer problems during integration. You are most understanding," Okonkwo replied, and she allowed none of her true feelings to show on her face. 24 of your hours, then," Velkos agreed. "Use this time well, human, and help your people understand that resistance would only bring suffering, and that submission brings peace, and that peace is all any species can truly hope for in this vast and dangerous universe." The transmission ended, and Okonkwo immediately turned to her aide. "Get me the joint chiefs of every nation," she ordered, "and bring Dr. Vasquez here within the hour, and tell him to bring everything, every file, every prototype, every weapon we've been hiding." "Madam Secretary," her aide stammered, clearly confused. "What are you planning?" Okonkwo looked out her window at the sky, where she could see the faint glimmers of alien ships catching the sunlight, and when she spoke, her voice carried a weight that made her aide shiver. "They think we're going to surrender," she said. "They think we're using this time to accept our fate and prepare for submission." She turned back to face the young man, and there was something in her eyes, something fierce and ancient and utterly human. "They're wrong," Okonkwo said. "We're not preparing to surrender, and we're not preparing to submit. And these 24 hours aren't for saying goodbye to our freedom." "Then what are they for?" her aide asked. Okonkwo smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile. And it was not a gentle smile, and it was the smile of a species that had survived ice ages and plagues and world wars and had never, ever learned how to give up. "These 24 hours, she said, "are for loading our weapons outside." The alien armada waited with the patient confidence of predators who had never known defeat, completely unaware that the small blue planet below them was not preparing to kneel. Humanity had other plans entirely. The bunker beneath Geneva had existed since the Cold War, but it had been expanded and modified countless times over the decades, and now it served as the nerve center for humanity's most desperate. Horse Secretary General Amara Okonkwo stood at the head of a long table surrounded by generals, admirals, presidents, prime ministers, and one man who wore no uniform and held no official title, but whose presence commanded the attention of everyone in the room. Dr. Emil Vasquez was 73 years old, with wild white hair and hands that trembled slightly from too much coffee and too little sleep. And he had spent the last 50 years of his life preparing for exactly this moment. In 2089, Vasquez began, his voice steady despite his shaking hands. A mining expedition on Europa discovered something buried beneath the ice. A ship, alien in origin, crashed there perhaps 1,000,000 years ago. The world leaders exchanged shocked glances, but no one interrupted. "We kept it secret," Vasquez continued. "Not because we were afraid of panic, but because we knew that someday visitors would come. And we wanted to be ready when they did, and we wanted them to underestimate us when they arrived." He pressed a button, and holographic images filled the air above the table. Schematics and blueprints and weapons, systems that looked like something from science fiction. "For 50 years, we have reverse-engineered that technology," Vasquez said. "We built orbital defense platforms disguised as weather satellites. And we constructed shield generators hidden in mountains around the world. And we developed weapons that channel the power of our own sun into beams of concentrated destruction. General Jiang Wei leaned forward, his earlier despair replaced by something that looked almost like hope. "The Sunspear satellites," Jiang whispered. "I always wondered why those projects had such massive budgets for simple solar energy collection. They were never for energy collection," Vasquez confirmed with a thin smile. "They were always for war." President Jackson of the United States spoke up, his voice carrying the weight of a nation and a world on his shoulders. "Dr. Vasquez, are you telling us we can actually fight back against that fleet?" "I am telling you," Vasquez replied, "that we can hurt them badly, and that we might even win, and that we will certainly make them remember the day they threatened Earth." Prime Minister Nakamura of Japan raised her hand, her face troubled. "And if we lose?" she asked. "If we fight and fail, they said they would pacify us." And we all saw what that means. The room fell silent, and the weight of that question pressed down on everyone. President Okonkwo stood and walked to the window. Even though the window only showed rock walls deep underground. "When I was a girl in Nigeria," she said quietly, "my grandmother told me stories about our ancestors who were taken as slaves, and about those who fought back even when fighting meant death, and about why they fought." She turned to face the assembled leaders of humanity. "They fought because some things matter more than survival," Okonkwo said. "They fought because freedom is worth dying for, and because a life lived on your knees is not really life at all, and because sometimes the only way to truly live is to risk everything." One by one, the leaders nodded, and one by one, they made their choice. The next 20 hours were a blur of activity as humanity prepared for the fight of its existence in secret bases around the world. Soldiers received new weapons and new orders and new hope in orbit. Satellites that had pretended to be harmless for decades powered up systems that had never been tested in actual combat in the deepest parts of the ocean. Submarines carrying nuclear missiles received targeting data for the alien fleet, and in homes and apartments and shelters everywhere, ordinary people watched the countdown clock and held their loved ones close and whispered prayers to whatever gods they believed in when the 24 hours ended. Okonkwo stood before a camera that would broadcast to the Council fleet and to every human being on Earth simultaneously. Behind her stood representatives from every nation, presidents and prime ministers, soldiers and scientists, people of every race and religion and background, united for the first time in human history by a common threat and a common purpose. "High Arbiter Velkos," Okonkwo began, her voice clear and strong. "Humanity has considered your offer of protective integration and unconditional surrender." On his ship, Velkos watched with the patient confidence of a being who had done this hundreds of times before. "We decline." Okonkwo said. Velkos tilted his massive head, uncertain if the translation software had malfunctioned. "I do not understand," he replied. "Perhaps there has been an error in communication, and perhaps you do not fully comprehend what declination means." "We understand perfectly," Okonkwo said. "You want us to give up our freedom, and you want us to accept slavery with a gentle name. And you want us to bow down and live the rest of our existence as pets." Her voice hardened like steel. "We refuse." "Then you choose extinction," Velkos said. And there was something like regret in his voice, or perhaps just disappointment. "Your species will be erased from the universe, and your world will burn. And your children will never know what you have cost them with your foolish pride." Okonkwo smiled then, and it was a smile that had been worn by humans since the first cave dweller faced down a predator with nothing but a sharp rock and stubborn courage. "High Arbiter," she said, "you have traveled the galaxy for 100,000 years, and you have conquered countless species, and you have never known defeat." She leaned forward, and her smile widened. "Do you understand what that means?" She asked. It means you have forgotten what it feels like to be afraid. And you have forgotten what it means to fight for your survival. And you have forgotten that the most dangerous creature in the universe is not the strongest or the smartest. Vel'Koz found himself leaning forward as well, caught up in the strange intensity of this small human woman. The most dangerous creature, Okonkwo said, is the one with nothing left to lose. You think your courage will save you? Vel'Koz asked, and now there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice that he had not felt in millennia. I think you have no idea what you have awakened, Okonkwo replied. I think you expected sheep and found wolves. And I think you came here expecting surrender and will leave here, if you leave at all, with a very different understanding of humanity. She straightened and addressed the camera one final time. To the people of Earth, she said, stand tall and stand together. And remember that we are the children of 100 generations who faced impossible odds and survived. And we will survive this too, or we will die fighting, and either way, we will show the universe what it means to be human. The transmission ended across the planet. 8 billion humans looked up at the sky with fear and determination, and something that Vel'Koz and the Council had never seen in any species they had subjugated. They looked up with defiance and they smiled. The first shots came from the Council fleet at exactly midnight Greenwich Mean Time, and 10,000 beams of superheated plasma screamed down toward Earth with enough power to crack continents and boil oceans. Arbiter Vel'Koz watched from his command vessel with the calm certainty of someone who had witnessed this scene play out 100 times before. And he expected to see cities burn and humans die, and another young species learned the final lesson of defiance. What he saw instead made his 4 eyes widen in shock. Golden light erupted across the Earth's atmosphere as shield generators hidden in every mountain range on the planet activated simultaneously, and the plasma beams struck that barrier and dissipated into harmless sparks that fell like rain. Impossible, whispered one of the Council commanders, a serpentine being called Admiral Vesic. No primitive species has ever possessed shield technology of this magnitude. They are not as primitive as we believed, Vel'Koz replied. And for the first time in 3,000 years, he felt something cold settle into his chest, something that felt uncomfortably like doubt before he could give another order. The counterattack began. The Sunspear satellites activated all at once, drawing power from the sun itself and focusing it into beams of pure destruction that cut across the void of space like the fingers of an angry god. Council vessels that had never known defeat exploded into fireballs of metal and flesh, and the screams of dying aliens filled the communication channels. Return fire, Vel'Koz commanded. All vessels, maximum bombardment, bring down those shields. The space around Earth became a hell of light, and fire is the most powerful fleet in galactic history unleashed everything it had against a single small planet. But the shields held in humanity was not finished surprising them from asteroid bases in the belt that had been secretly constructed over decades. Swarms of autonomous drones launched toward the Council fleet, millions of them, each one carrying enough explosives to cripple a warship. Admiral Vesic's flagship took 17 drone impacts in the span of 30 seconds, and the massive vessel broke apart in a cascade of explosions that lit up the darkness. How? Vesic screamed into his communicator before the vacuum claimed him. How do they have bases in their asteroid belt? We scanned the entire system. He died without receiving an answer on the ground. Humanity fought with equal ferocity. Railguns hidden in bunkers around the world fired projectiles at incredible speeds, and those metal slugs tore through Council landing craft like paper. And the alien soldiers inside died before they even understood what had killed them in Tokyo. A Council strike force of 500 warriors teleported into the city center, expecting to face terrified civilians. and instead found themselves surrounded by Japanese self-defense. 4 soldiers armed with weapons that should not have existed. The battle lasted 4 minutes, and no council warriors survived in Rio de Janeiro. Alien dropships attempted to land on the beaches, and submarine-launched missiles rose from the ocean and turned those ships into falling debris that crashed into the waves in Cairo, in Moscow, in Sydney, in cities across the world. The story repeated humanity fought back with weapons they should not have possessed and courage that the council had never encountered. But the greatest moment of the battle came 72 hours into the fighting, when Captain Yuki Tanaka made her choice. Tanaka commanded the destroyer Yamato, one of the few human warships capable of operating in space. And her vessel had been fighting non-stop since the first shot was fired. The Yamato was dying, its weapons depleted, its shields failing, its hull cracked and leaking atmosphere. But Tanaka had noticed something that none of the council commanders had considered important. Valace's command ship, the massive vessel called Eternal Dominion, had repositioned to coordinate the assault, and in doing so, it had moved just close enough for a desperate gamble. All hands, Tanaka announced over the ship's intercom, her voice calm despite everything. This is the captain speaking, and I want you to know that it has been an honor to serve with you. And I want you to know that what we do now will be remembered forever. Her first officer, Commander James Morrison, understood immediately. Captain, he said. You can't. I can, Tanaka interrupted. And I will. And I need you to get the crew to the escape pods now. The Yamato accelerated toward the Eternal Dominion, and at first the council ship did not even bother to target such a small and damaged vessel. That was a mistake. Tanaka aimed her ship directly at the Eternal Dominion's shield generator array, and in the final seconds before impact, she launched the Yamato's last remaining weapon, a nuclear missile modified with technology from the Europa wreckage. Then she ejected. The Yamato struck the shields and exploded. And for a brief moment, the Eternal Dominion's defenses flickered. And in that moment, the nuclear missile slipped through and detonated against the hull. The explosion tore through the command ship's forward section, killing 3,000 council crew members and destroying the vessel's primary weapons. Velkos survived only because he had been in the rear section. But as he pulled himself from the wreckage and looked at the damage reports flooding his screens, he felt something he had not experienced in his entire long life. Fear. High Arbiter, one of his surviving officers, reported, his voice shaking. We have lost 40% of the fleet, and casualties exceed 200,000. And morale among the remaining crews is, I know, Velkos interrupted. And his voice sounded strange even to his own ears, weak and uncertain and old. He looked at the view screen, where the small blue planet still hung defiantly in space, its shields still glowing gold against the darkness. For 100,000 years, the Council had conquered every species they encountered, and they had done so because they believed themselves superior. And they had believed themselves superior because no one had ever proven them wrong until now. Velkos made a decision that no High Arbiter had made in 50,000 years. Signal the human leadership, he ordered. Tell them we wish to negotiate. His officers stared at him in disbelief. High Arbiter, one of them protested. We cannot negotiate with primitives. The Council will. The Council is not here, Velkos interrupted. And if we continue this battle, none of us will survive to report to them. And I will not leave what remains of this fleet to destruction against an enemy we clearly underestimated. He looked at the blue planet one more time, and somewhere in the back of his ancient mind, he felt something unexpected. Respect. Captain Yuki Tanaka floated in her escape pod, watching the damaged Council flagship retreat, and despite her injuries and exhaustion, she smiled. Humanity was still fighting. Humanity was still alive. And for the first time, the masters of the galaxy knew what it meant to face a species that would never surrender. The meeting took place on the moon, in a hastily constructed dome that stood in the gray dust of the Sea of Tranquility, not far from where human bootprints had marked the first steps of a species. Reaching for the Star Secretary General, Amara Okonkwo arrived with a small delegation. Dr. Vasquez, General Zhang, and Captain Yuki Tanaka, whose arm was still in a sling from her ejection, but who had refused to miss this moment. High Arbiter Vel'Koz came with only 2 guards, his massive form moving slowly through the artificial gravity as if the weight of his failure pressed down on him from above. For a long moment, the 2 groups simply stared at each other across the conference table, predator and prey, conqueror and conquered. Except that nothing had gone the way it was supposed to go. 60,000 years, Vel'Koz finally said, his translated voice heavy with something that sounded almost like exhaustion. 60,000 years since the Council last suffered a defeat in battle. And even that was against another elder species, not against primitives who only discovered fire 100,000 years ago. We prefer the term young species. Okonkwo replied with a slight smile. And we are not as young as you assumed. No, Vel'Koz agreed. You are not, and that is what I cannot understand. And that is what brought me here to ask the question that has haunted me since your shields first activated. He leaned forward, his 4 eyes fixed on the small human woman before him. How? He demanded. How did you achieve this? And how did you develop technology that rivals our own? And how did you learn to fight with such ferocity? And how, his voice cracked slightly, how did you hurt us so badly? Okonkwo glanced at Dr. Vasquez, who nodded slowly. To answer that question, Okonkwo said, I need to tell you a story, the story of humanity. She stood and walked to the dome's window, looking out at the earth hanging blue and beautiful in the black sky. You spoke of the gentle path, she began. The philosophy that guides the elder species' slow evolution. Careful progress, the elimination of conflict and competition, the creation of perfect, peaceful societies over millions of years. It is the only way, Vel'Koz said. Conflict breeds destruction, and competition breeds war, and war breeds extinction. And the elder species learned this lesson long ago. Perhaps, Okonkwo replied. But humanity learned a different lesson. She turned to face the alien, and her eyes held a depth of experience that surprised him. Our world was never gentle, she said. From the moment life appeared on Earth, it was a battle species fighting species. Creatures evolving teeth and claws and poisons. Predators hunting prey and prey learning to fight back. General Zhang spoke up, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 generations of warriors. We evolved on a world where everything wanted to kill us, he said. Ice ages froze our ancestors, and plagues killed millions. And predators stalked us in the night, and the earth itself tried to destroy us with earthquakes and volcanoes and floods. And that is not even counting what we did to each other, Tanaka added quietly. Wars that lasted centuries, empires that rose and fell, weapons that could destroy entire cities. We have been fighting since the first human picked up a rock and used it against another human. Vel'Koz processed this information with growing unease. Your species has been at war with itself for your entire existence, he asked. Yes, Okonkwo confirmed. And each war taught us something, and each disaster made us stronger. And each generation that survived passed down its knowledge and its determination to the next. She walked back to the table and sat down, her eyes never leaving the High Arbiter. You asked how we achieved technology that rivals yours, she said. The answer is simple. We found your crashed ship on Europa, and we studied it, and we learned from it, and then we improved upon it. Because that is what humans do. One crashed ship? Vel'Koz said incredulously. You reverse-engineered elder technology from one damaged vessel? In 50 years, Vasquez confirmed with obvious pride. Your species took millions of years to develop the same technology naturally. And we did it in half a century because we had no choice. And because necessity is the mother of invention, and because humans are very good at adapting. Vel'Koz was silent for a long moment, processing everything he had heard. The gentle path, he finally said, his voice carrying a new understanding. The gentle path eliminated struggle from our evolution, and in doing so, it eliminated the very thing that made you strong. Yes, Okonkwo said. Your species never had to fight for survival, never had to adapt or die, never had to face extinction and choose to keep living anyway. And so you became powerful but not resilient. And you became advanced but not adaptable. And when you conquered younger species, Tanaka added, you eliminated every civilization that might have challenged you except for us. The ones you missed, the ones who grew strong in isolation. Vel'Koz looked at his guards, at the dome around them, at the small blue planet visible through the window, and he understood at last why this battle had gone so terribly wrong. You are not primitives, he said slowly. You are survivors, forged by fire and blood and millions of years of endless struggle, and we walked into your system expecting sheep and found ourselves facing wolves. Wolves who have learned to cooperate, Okonkwo corrected. Wolves who have finally stopped fighting each other long enough to face a common enemy. And wolves who are willing to die rather than submit. A soft chime interrupted the conversation, and Vasquez checked his communication device before allowing a small smile to cross his face. There is one more thing you should know, he said. When the battle began, we activated a very special system that cracked your communication encryption and allowed us to broadcast everything that happened here to the entire galaxy. Vel'Koz stiffened. Every species under Council control has watched your fleet suffer defeat. Vasquez continued. Every client species, every conquered world, every slave race has seen that the masters of the galaxy can bleed. Reports began flooding into Vel'Koz's personal communicator, reports of uprisings on a dozen worlds, of client species suddenly finding their courage, of the galactic order beginning to crack. What have you done? He whispered. We have shown them the truth, Okonkwo replied. We have shown them that tyrants can be defeated, and that freedom is worth fighting for, and that even the mightiest empire can fall when enough people refuse to kneel. She stood and extended her hand toward the alien, a human gesture of peace that crossed the gap between species. The galaxy is changing. High Arbiter, she said. The question is whether you and the Council will change with it, or whether you will be swept away by the tide of history. Vel'Koz looked at her hand for a long moment, and then he did something that no High Arbiter had done in 100,000 years. He reached out and took it. 6 months had passed since the battle that changed the galaxy, and the universe looked very different than it had before. The Council's remaining fleet had retreated to their home systems, their once mighty armada reduced to a fraction of its former strength. Their reputation as invincible conquerors shattered beyond repair across the galaxy. The dominoes continued to fall in Desert Prime, the insectoid species that had ruled as the Council's enforcers for millennia faced revolution in their own streets, as the lower castes, inspired by humanity's defiance, demanded rights they had never dared to ask for before. The water world of Nothos, the amphibian people who had served as Council slaves for 10,000 years, rose up against their masters, and the images of their rebellion spread across the galactic network like wildfire on world after world. Species that had lived under Council control for longer than human civilization had existed suddenly remembered what freedom felt like, and they wanted it back. And at the center of it all stood Earth's small blue, and absolutely refusing to be ignored. The Free Worlds Compact was officially formed on a spring morning in Geneva, with representatives from 17 species signing the charter that would bind them together in mutual defense and cooperation. Secretary General Okonkwo stood at the podium. looking out at the gathered delegates, humans and aliens standing side by side for the first time in history. "We did not seek this war," she said, her voice carrying across the assembly hall. "We did not ask to become the symbol of resistance against tyranny. And we certainly did not expect to find ourselves leading a galactic revolution." She paused, and her eyes found the figure standing quietly in the back of the room. High Arbiter Vel'Koz, former commander of the fleet that had tried to conquer Earth. Now a refugee seeking asylum from his own people, who wanted him dead for his failure, watched the proceedings with an expression that was difficult to read. "But here we are," Okonkwo continued, "and we have a choice to make about what comes next." She looked around the room at the representatives of species that had been enemies. Slaves, conquerors, and victims, now sitting together as equals. "We could seek revenge," she said. "We could use our new alliance to crush the Council completely, to make them pay for the millennia of oppression they inflicted on the galaxy, and to ensure that they never threaten anyone again." Several delegates nodded eagerly at this suggestion, their eyes burning with the memory of generations of suffering. "But that is not who we are," Okonkwo said firmly. "And that is not who we want to become." She pressed a button, and the holographic display behind her showed not weapons or battle plans, but something else entirely, a fleet of ships designed not for war but for exploration, for science, for the advancement of all species. "We fought because we had no choice," Okonkwo said. "We fought because freedom was worth dying for, and we won because we refused to surrender. But we did not fight to become conquerors ourselves." Admiral Yuki Tanaka, promoted after her heroism in the battle, stepped forward to stand beside the Secretary General. "The first ships of the exploration fleet will launch next month," Tanaka announced. "We will travel to distant stars, not to conquer but to discover, and not to enslave but to offer friendship to any species we encounter." She smiled, and it was a smile that had been earned through sacrifice and tempered by loss. "We will show the galaxy that there is another way," Tanaka said. "A way that does not require dominance or submission. A way that allows every species to grow and thrive on their own terms. A way that the Council never imagined possible." The assembly erupted in applause, and for a moment, the representatives of 17 different species beings of every shape and color and form celebrated together as one after the ceremony. Okonkwo found Vel'Koz standing alone on a balcony, looking up at the stars. "You could have killed me," the former High Arbiter said, without turning around. "Your people would have celebrated my death, and no one would have blamed you. And yet you granted me asylum instead." "You surrendered when you could have kept fighting," Okonkwo replied. "You chose to end the bloodshed when you could have forced us to destroy your entire fleet. And that choice saved millions of lives, human and Council alike." Vel'Koz finally turned to face her, and there was something in his 4 eyes that she had never expected to see: gratitude. "I have lived for 3,000 years, he said, "and I have conquered more worlds than I can count. I believe with absolute certainty that the Council's way was the only way for civilization to survive." He gestured toward the celebration still going on inside. "You have proven me wrong," he continued. "You have shown me that strength does not require cruelty, and that unity does not require submission, and that the galaxy is large enough for many different paths to coexist. Will you help us?" Okonkwo asked, "Will you use your knowledge of the Council to help us build something better?" Vel'Koz was silent for a long moment. "I will try," he finally said. "It is the least I can do to honor the species that taught an old fool a new lesson." 1 year later, the exploration vessel New Dawn launched from Earth orbit, its hull gleaming in the sunlight. As it prepared to make the journey into the unknown, Admiral Tanaka stood on the bridge, surrounded by a crew of humans and aliens working together in harmony, and she felt a sense of hope that she had not known was possible. Course plotted for the Andromeda Arm. A navigation officer reported, "We will be the first explorers from the Compact to visit that region of the galaxy. Then let's make history." Tanaka replied with a grin. The ship jumped to faster-than-light speed and vanished into the stars on a distant world at the edge of known space. Young aliens gathered around a fire as an elder told them stories of the great events that had reshaped the galaxy. And so the small species from the blue world did what no one believed possible, the elder said. They stood against the gods of the galaxy and refused to kneel. And they smiled in the face of death, and they won. Did they really smile? One of the young ones asked. Even when they were afraid? Especially when they were afraid, the elder replied. Because that is what the humans taught us, that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else is more important. The young aliens looked up at the stars with new eyes, seeing not the lights of distant suns, but the promise of a future where any species could be free. The galaxy believed that survival required submission, the elder concluded. But humanity taught us a different lesson, that sometimes survival requires a smile, a refusal, and the courage to fight for something worth dying for. The fire crackled. The stars shone, and somewhere out in the vast darkness of space, the children of Earth continued their journey into the unknown. They had faced the masters of the galaxy and won. And now they had a new mission, not to conquer, but to explore, not to dominate, but to discover, and not to enslave, but to offer the hand of friendship to any species brave enough to take it. The galaxy would never be the same, and humanity smiled.